Persecutory delusions are a false belief that a person will be harmed by a persecutor or persecutors. So it could be a person that they know or a group of people, like an organization, say the FBI or the CIA. Essentially, any threat that is perceived is false. There's no evidence that a person's in any harm, but the delusion persists nonetheless that this person will be harmed by something or someone. These delusions are a very severe form of paranoia, and they're often associated with depression and anxiety and sleep problems, as well as a lower self-esteem. There's also a higher likelihood that a person will act on these delusions, say, for instance, not leaving their home and shutting the blinds if they think they're being spied on. Also, risk of acting out in violence if they perceive a physical threat. So what exactly are some of these delusions? What would be an example of a persecutory delusion? Common persecutory delusions involve being followed, being spied on, being preyed upon, someone plotting to ruin your life or hurt you in some way, being abducted, being tracked, being observed by the FBI, and, possibly maybe getting kidnapped and tortured. Like, there's so much that is involved with this extreme paranoia. Essentially, any way that you could perceive yourself being harmed can be deluded. Oftentimes, people use safety behaviors to cope. Safety behaviors are essentially coping behaviors to alleviate the fear and anxiety associated with these delusions. These behaviors basically prevent the threat from happening, and they can look like, say, planning an exit route when you go places, scoping your surroundings to look for all your possible exits and having an escape plan. It can look like constantly surveilling your surroundings for people who may be threats. It could be checking your environment a lot, looking for bugs. Maybe a person would be checking their locks a lot to see if anyone has broken in, or maybe they'll always have sound going, like a TV or a radio at all times, so that if they talk, they have something drowning out their voice in case people are listening. It could even be staying up for ridiculous amounts of times to make sure that your house is always being monitored and that there's never a waking moment when it's not secured. And this can lead to avoidant behavior as well. A person may socially withdraw if they feel a threat of the people around them. They may cut themselves off from the outside world. They may shelter themselves in their home and develop agoraphobia and not leave the house and just avoid any situation that could have a possible threat. And these threats could be pretty much anything and everything. It could be organizations, like I said, like the FBI and CIA, of people that they don't know, people they've never been in contact with, but it can also be their loved ones. It can be people in their own personal lives who they are wary of, say their caregiver, their primary caregiver, their spouse, their friends, their kids, their boss. It can basically be applied to pretty much anyone. It's not so much why the person is a threat, it's just that there could be a threat. For me, when I've had persecutory delusions, I often feel like I have limited information and I don't fully understand what is going on. So I don't have a full fleshed out concept of why I'm being preyed on or who's preying on me. I just have a sense that it's happening, and that can heighten the paranoia because the not knowing factor, the not knowing who's after me or how they will get me, just amplifies it so much. These are very hard delusions to shake. Sometimes with delusions, you can reality check with people and kind of check in and say, hey, is this actually real? Or is this something that I've got going on in me? And people can bounce back to you, say with hallucinations, like, yeah, no, that's not a real sound that you're hearing. I don't hear that. And you can be like, okay, cool. So that's just me. With delusions, it can be a lot harder. It can be a lot harder because in the nature of persecutory delusions, if you were to reality check with someone and say, hey, do you think that this person is after me? And they say, no, they're not after you. It could just add to that delusion by saying, would kind of essentially tell you, okay, you're in on it, you're in cahoots with this person, and now I can't trust you too. So it's very tricky to navigate, and if you can gain the trust of a person who's having persecutory delusions, that is huge. And I would suggest being very gentle and careful with them, helping them through their fears and emotions, because it is incredibly complex and can turn on a dime. So be gentle, be careful. That's the best advice I can give to anyone navigating psychosis. Hallucinations and delusions are commonly what come to mind when people think of psychosis. This is actually just the tip of the iceberg. There is so much more involved. There are actually 3 types of symptoms: positive symptoms, negative symptoms, and cognitive symptoms. Today, I'm just going to focus on positive and negative symptoms. Positive and negative symptoms are not good and bad. They're actually symptoms that add and subtract from a person's experience of psychosis. Positive symptoms add to your condition. They add elements that make it harder to function. They add to your reality. So things like hallucinations are superimposed on top of reality. This is an addition to reality outside of a person's typical reality. These are things that just completely heighten the experience through false beliefs and false perceptions. They kind of overhaul your reality. One example of a positive symptom is hallucinations, and there are 5 types of hallucinations. There are 5 senses involved. So you have tactile hallucinations, where you can feel things like bugs crawling under your skin, or maybe a layer of clothing or a blanket, which is one that I get. There are olfactory hallucinations of smelling things like sulfur, for instance. There are visual hallucinations, where you'd be seeing things that aren't there, auditory hallucinations, where you're hearing things that aren't there. And I don't know that it's included, but I've heard people say that they sometimes taste things that they're not actually tasting. Then there are delusions, which are another symptom, and they basically are beliefs that aren't true, that cannot be overcome by logic. There are several types of delusions. There are grandiose, somatic, persecutory, religious, referential, and erotomanic. Persecutory delusions are a belief that you will be harmed and people are a threat to you, and this can look like being suspicious that someone will attack you or hurt you, being spied on, being followed, things like that. Then there are grandiose delusions, where a person may believe that they are extra special or have unusual powers. For instance, I used to think that I could control the weather, so I was responsible for when it rained. That wasn't true, but that was a power that I believed I had, which would be a type of grandiose delusion. You could also think you are a god, or that you're invincible and can't be hurt. Some people will run into traffic because they don't think they can be hurt by cars, for instance. Religious delusions are immersed heavily in religion. They are having beliefs in faith that are heightened, or beliefs in faith where there were no beliefs before. For instance, I grew up in a religious background, but when I was psychotic, that delusion was amplified to the point where I'd think I was the Virgin Mary, or other times I'd think I was Jesus, or even pregnant with Jesus. And while I did have faith, it wasn't anywhere to that scale. People who may be atheists will even have these delusions, and it is not associated with religious trauma, although that is often the thinking. It doesn't actually have anything to do with a person's original religious background. It's a false belief, so it's actually not really related. Somatic delusions are a belief that there is something wrong with your body, that you may have an ailment or an illness. Cotard's delusion could be an exaggeration of that, because it can be a belief that you're dead. But along with Cotard's delusion come beliefs that you may be missing body parts, or that you have festering wounds. So people may have hypochondria and believe, like for instance, they have tumors, they have cancer. They are often not sick, but That is the belief. Referential delusions are having a belief that ordinary events are impacting you in some way that has a hidden meaning. So reading books and pulling meaning out of the words, interpreting things through television shows, for instance. I used to call watching Adventure Time the weather report, because things that happened in the show, I would write them down and translate it to what I thought was going to happen that day. So if someone was like eating a lollipop, my mind for some reason would be like, oh, I'm going to make a friend, or like I'm going to talk to a stranger. I don't know. It wouldn't make sense, but there'd always be a hidden meaning associated with literally anything. Any single thing like on the TV, no matter what it was, I would take meaning from it. Or even signs in colors that I saw at the grocery store, like patterns and things. The meaning had nothing to do with what it was associated with. It was like completely random. And finally, erotomanic delusions are having a belief that someone is in love with you and that they're obsessed with you. Oftentimes, it's not actually someone that a person will know. It'll be like a celebrity. It'll be maybe the president who is in love with you, or even Lady Gaga who is in love with you. People who have nothing to do with you, who've never met you, who will never meet you, who you've never been associated with or been in contact with, but still having that belief that they're just like pining for you and they love you so strongly. This video has actually become a lot more involved than I realized, so I'm going to make a part 2 about negative symptoms because I just don't think I can fit it into this video, and it deserves its own video altogether. So look out for that. Positive and negative symptoms are two different types of psychosis that are very different, but also very extreme. So positive symptoms add to a person's experience of psychosis and they add to reality. So you have things like hallucinations and delusions that are just additions. So they are extensions of your reality, while negative symptoms subtract from your experience, and this will be struggling to function, being void of certain abilities you used to have, being void of like expression, speech, things like that. It's taken away from your experience. So let's talk about some of the negative symptoms that contribute to psychosis. Negative symptoms typically show up first in the initial phase of psychosis, the prodromal phase. These are the first symptoms to appear, and they can look a lot like depression, but it's important to note that they're actually not, and they are indicators of what's next to come, the positive symptoms. So the first negative symptom I'll tell you about is avolition, and avolition is a lack of motivation. It's difficulty following through on tasks. It's not procrastination. It's not laziness. It's having a literal inability to do things, to like prompt yourself to do things and follow through on them. This can be things like showering or eating or even just getting out of bed. It can be debilitating just to perform those basic functions. Next is anhedonia, which is an inability to feel pleasure. So things that a person loves, or at least used to love, things that satisfied and fulfilled them, become empty, and you won't find satisfaction or pleasure in them anymore. Like if you were to have a hobby, like say you loved fishing, you wouldn't feel anything towards that anymore. You'd have apathy, you'd have disinterest, you wouldn't really want to engage in it because it wouldn't give you pleasure. And this can even extend to having no sexual desire, having a lack of sex drive. Then there's asociality, which is a lack of interest in social interactions. So having a decreased interest in, being with people, talking with people, socializing, being around anyone at all, like being withdrawn from people altogether. And this can be related to delusions. Say if you had persecutory delusions that people were out to get you, this would contribute to your lack of social interactions. There's also blunted or flat affect, and that is showing very little emotion, having diminished emotion, and basically having a flat tone, very monotone, showing very little emotion or expression in your face, not having as expressive gestures, having blunted body language, just showing no expression, no emotion, and, having a deprivation of those feelings. For example, I'm just going to give you a little portrayal of how I would act when I had a blunted affect. So it would be like, okay, yeah, all right, that sounds good. I suppose we could do that. Sure. Okay, I guess. And then finally, there's alosia, which is poverty of speech. And this is struggling to find words, having a hard time talking less, not talking at all, having long pauses between words or sentences, only being able to answer yes or no questions, or not being able to elaborate on thoughts, not being able to really expand on answers, just giving the basic information. Like if someone was like, hey, how was your day? What did you do today? You'd be like, fine, I went to work. Or for me, I just couldn't do anything but answer yes or no questions. It was almost like I'd forgotten how to talk. And there was this like barrier in my mind that couldn't really find words or even thoughts. So those are 5 negative symptoms of psychosis. And again, these are the early warning signs. Like while they will continue throughout psychosis, they are also the first ones to appear. So catching them early on is very important, because if you can recognize them, you can get treatment and come out of an episode faster and avoid more trauma. All in all, it's the best way to recognize, identify, and treat your psychosis early.